Now then, just how squeaky clean do we expect our MPs' morals to be after a summer of scandal over MPs' expenses? Another row has broken out in the Conservative Party, this time over standards of sexual behaviour. Norfolk's South West Constituency Party is threatening to deselect their candidate Elizabeth Truss because she didn't tell them she had an affair with a married man 5 years ago. David Cameron says she's an excellent candidate, saying her affair with the MP Mark Field had been in the public domain when she was selected. So, are the Norfolk Tories out of touch? How does the court of public opinion now view affairs? And would Elizabeth Truss be treated differently if she was in fact a man? Joining me now to discuss all that, the former Conservative Minister Edwina Currie, the Daily Mail columnist Anne Atkins is in North London, and in our central London studio, the former Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo. Morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Edwina, you're sitting next to me. Let's start with you. Is the Conservative Party still governed by the sort of moral guide of the Blue Rinse Brigade?
I rather like the description of the people in Norfolk that you've just been talking about as the turnip Taliban. And I think there is an element.
They've not come out of it very well in some blogs I've read, that's for sure.
They have come out of it very, very badly indeed. And that's a pity, because they're all volunteers, they're all local people. They get involved in politics because they care about their community and their country and so on. And their views should attract some respect, even if we don't necessarily always agree with them. And I think there's also a generational thing. Anybody over 50 understands what their concerns are. Anybody under 40 can't figure out what on earth the row is about, because the way people do things in younger generations is quite different. On the other hand, if you expect your MP to be perfect, then you're going to get somebody who doesn't understand politics in the end and may not really be a human being.
So, bottom line question, would you select Elizabeth Truss and would you vote for her?
I would select Elizabeth Truss, and I would urge her to get on as well as she can, to exercise that charm with all the old gentlemen on the committee as well as the old ladies.
Okay. Michael Portillo, what do you make of all this?
Well, I don't agree with Edwina in one particular respect. I think the so-called Blue Rinse Brigade is done a great disservice, because in my experience very often the more elderly members of the Conservative Party were surprisingly liberal in their outlook. You've got to remember that these people are grandparents, and their grandchildren by now, you know, have been involved in extramarital affairs, have had illegitimate children, have turned out to be gay. You know, I found that actually amongst these older people there was very often an enormous degree of understanding of the diversity of modern life. In this particular case of Norfolk, you see, you don't know what all the story is. I mean, I'm not really sure whether the issue is Elizabeth Truss's private life, or whether Elizabeth Truss is being accused of not being straightforward, not being honest. You know, maybe she was asked a question about this. I don't know. So I think nowadays you can't expect your members of Parliament to have impeccable private lives. They should reflect the society from which they're being elected, and in the society from which they're being elected there are lots of people who have extramarital affairs and so on, so it's bound to be that MPs, if they represent them accurately...
You can't have a quota of people who've had flavours, can you?
No, but I'm saying that actually MPs do represent the population. I mean, for example...
I'm just being flippant.
10% of MPs are saints, 10% of MPs are villains, and 80% of MPs are in the middle, which is just like the population. But what I think you can expect an MP to be is honest. So if you ask somebody a question, they ought to give you the right answer to that. So I don't know whether that's the issue in Norfolk.
Anne Atkins, I suspect one or two of your readers might vote for the Conservative Party. What do they think of all this?
Well, I have to say I find quite a lot of this talk extremely patronising. I actually find Edwina's parallel with the Taliban extremely offensive. That we're not talking here about, you know, things like denying women rights and not having a proper democracy. In fact, this is a question of democracy. What's happened, Michael's quite right that there are two issues here. One issue is, should the people of Norfolk be allowed the MP they want? And absolutely the answer is yes. The other issue is whether we think this is a legitimate, you know, an MP's behaviour is a legitimate thing to judge an MP on. Now, I find this extraordinary in the light of all the last 6 months fuss about MPs, most of whom have not been breaking the law, and yet there has been widespread offence about behaviour that has been perceived to be greedy and, you know, lacking in discretion. We're now talking about something much more serious, which is whether somebody can keep the most important promise that most of us ever make in our lives. We've been talking about integrity. There are very few adulterers who don't tell lies.
She wasn't, of course.
Generally, to you.
I should say that she, of course, wasn't married at the time.
I'm not talking now about whether she was honest with the selection committee. I don't think she was dishonest. She just, you know, she didn't. The fact that she didn't mention it is not necessarily dishonest. But what I'm talking about is the fact that in order to commit adultery, you've broken your own promises. You sometimes making somebody else break his promises, as she was. You usually lie in your private life. Do we want somebody in such an important position who has no integrity in his or her private life? If an MP had been, you know, pilfering things from boots, we wouldn't think that was acceptable. If an MP was regularly getting drunk, which is not against the law, we wouldn't think that person was suitable to be in Parliament. It's not just a question of, people have said, what about, you know, if they do the job properly? It's not just a job. When you're in a position of leadership like that, it's who you are, it's how you live. It's not just the legislation you bring in, but that in itself is important. Children suffer terribly when adults commit adultery, and if somebody is committing adultery in her private life, how can she make marriage important in public policy?
All right, Anne, OK. Edwina, should there be a sort of private life checklist, a moral guidebook for people who want to be MPs?
Oh, God help us. God help us all. I mean, Anne, if I may be patronising just a little bit extra, has just demonstrated what I meant about the generational problem. And many younger people would find what she's just said completely ludicrous, completely ludicrous. The question is always, hang on, let somebody else get a word in, Anne. The question is always whether you can do the job properly, whether you've got somebody who can actually look after 80,000 voters with all the hard work that's involved. And Michael is quite right. The issue that many people feel quite hot under the collar about is whether there's honesty there, whether somebody is presenting themselves as something they're not. If they say, I'm gay, or if they say, I've had an affair, or if they say, I was in the news because of, are you all aware of that? That's in the past. Most selectors and most members of the public would say that's fine. In fact, Liz Truss, this particular candidate, went to an open primary. She didn't just go to a small group of party workers. She was selected by a very large group of people who came in, heard her speak, and she was chosen on the first ballot.
Michael, can I just ask you, how much scrutiny of your private life, went into your selection process?
Oh, I have no idea. You'd have to ask other people. I mean, it was an awfully long time ago, the first time around. Anyway, I was first selected in 1983 and then in 1984. But I want to go against what Anne has said. In my experience, some people with very, very messy private lives make excellent politicians, excellent members of Parliament, excellent public servants. And I think that's just a paradox that, Anne needs to wrestle with a bit. I mean, I was really amused when she started saying that, we should exclude people who drink quite a lot from politics. I mean, we would not have benefited from Winston Churchill if that had been the rule in those days. He was a heavy drinker. Margaret Thatcher used to enjoy a late-night whiskey, and she was, in my view, the second best Prime Minister after Churchill of the 20th century. So, I mean, it just shows that if we started to apply these rules, starting with sexual morality and then moving into every other human peccadillo, we would end up with an even more second-rate lot of people than I think we're in danger of ending up with at present.
Anne Atkins, they both seem to think you want sort of angelic clones as MPs.
I've been slightly misrepresented there. I didn't say we should only have teetotalers in Parliament. I said people who cannot contain themselves, who have no self-discipline in their private life, are not, it isn't just a question of doing a job. I'm saying what I said before. It's a question of people who can live a life that the rest of us admire. Now, it is simply not true to say that this is a generational issue in that young people don't care about it and old people too. I mean, Michael has made that point very well. The baby boomers are people in their 60s. They tend, in many ways, to be far more liberal than younger people. I've found amongst my own children, most of whom are in their 20s, that those of their friends who are in their 30s sleep around all over the place, and those who are in their 20s have begun to see the damage that not having integrity in your private life can do. And some of them are far more concerned about this kind of thing than older people. You know, how can we, none of us are in our 20s, those of us who are speaking, you know, it is, again, patronising in the extreme to say that young people don't care about this kind of thing. A lot of young people do. A lot of people in their teens and 20s have seen the damage that marriage breakdown does to their friends and to themselves, and they care about it an awful lot more. So it is simply not true to say that we've got, you know, these things go in cycles, don't they? The 18th century was very immoral. The 19th century had far higher standards. The standards of not caring are actually the standards that are on their way out, if my children's friends are anything to go by. So, you know, to come back to the basic point, we want politicians who can live lives that are worthy of the very high responsibility that they have, and if they cannot run their private lives, if they can't be trusted in, I mean, I hesitate to say, quote Jesus saying, they can't be trusted in a little thing, how can they be trusted in a great thing? Because their family lives are not a little thing at all. It's a very, very important thing. And it is absolutely a right that we have as voters to say we don't want MPs who cannot live a life of integrity and self-discipline. And the people of Norfolk have every right to say, we don't want this foisted on us by the chattering classes in Notting Hill. I mean, some of the language that's been used, you know, we're forward-looking here in London. How is it forward-looking to commit adultery?
And Edwina, we've got about a minute left. You can have 30 seconds, and Michael can have 30 seconds.
I'm sorry. Let me preach immediately. Judge not, lest ye be judged. What most voters want is somebody who's going to look after them. Look after them with integrity, look after them with determination and with energy. Put their needs first. That's what most people want.
Michael, 30 seconds.
President Kennedy, great President of the United States, slept with a different woman every night. Lloyd George, our war leader in World War I, wasn't safe alone with any woman. He was known as the Old Goat. Harold Macmillan's wife was having an affair with another member of Parliament. Thank God Anne wasn't around at those times to drive these good people out of politics.
Well, apparently, Anne, they've been at it like rabbits for generations.
Sorry.
No, I don't think I'll repeat that comment. I've saying politicians for many years have been up to no good. It's been an absolute lot of fun talking to all three of you. Go on, Anne, you can have 30 seconds if you like.
What this basically comes down to is, do we have a right to vote in the people we want to vote in? This is not really a question of adultery or drinking or whatever it is. It's a question of whether the people of Norfolk have a right to have the politician they want. And that's what democracy is all about. And we don't want to be told by people who live in London. I mean, I lived in London most of my life myself, but we don't want to be told by other people what we're allowed to care about and what we're not allowed to care about. If we care about the way our MPs live, we have every right to say so at the ballot box, and that's what all of this is about.